Greetings and salutations. This is Dr. Flight. I hope you're doing fantastic. What we're going to do is spend a little bit of time talking about the selection process for market segments. So the notion here is that we have segmented a market into a variety of different market segments. So smaller groups of consumers or clients that meet certain segmentation criteria, such as demographics, psychographics, geographics, and things like that, behavior. However, we need to be clear and use some strategy to determine how many market segments we want to try to reach, because we probably don't want to try to reach them all, and like an entry strategy and some type of decision making, like based on which market segments are best for us to try to reach, which ones we should stay away from, which ones make the most sense based on our product and service and who we think we can reach. Okay, so that's the idea of selecting segments, and then ultimately positioning our service or our product towards those clients that we want to try to reach based on this decision process. So that's what it is, and that's what we're going to jump into right now. Okay, as I alluded to, we want to choose segments in order to target. After successfully dividing the generic market into smaller market segments or groups of consumers, we got to decide how we're going to move forward, how we're going to proceed. We got two key decisions to make. How broad or narrow should our nonprofit be in its focus? And then second, based on this focus, which segment should the nonprofit focus its resources towards? So how broad? The broadest you can offer your service to is everyone, everybody. That would be an undifferentiated market. The most narrow you could focus your product or service to would be individual clients or a one-to-one basis. So that's the scope of the spectrum from broad to narrow. Do we serve everybody or do we serve individuals? Based on this focus, we typically don't choose those two extremes. Sometimes, usually we choose something in the middle. And so if we choose something in the middle, then we have to be very conscientious as to which market segments we're going to focus on. So spending a little bit more time talking about this idea of broad to narrow, we're going to go from a continuum of this very broad idea to very narrow. So some different directions here. Mass marketing to one-to-one marketing. So the traditional marketing texts talk about this in 4 different categories. I know there's only 3 on this little chart over here, but if we had these 4, we'd call them undifferentiated or mass markets, differentiated or target markets, concentrated or niche markets, or customized marketing, which we might also call mass customization or one-to-one markets, that individual thing. So broad to narrow. We got to make this big decision now in terms of what we're going to do. Defining these, we want to just kind of make sure we know what each one of these concepts mean. Undifferentiated market is one where we don't distinguish between market segments and we treat everyone in the audience the same way. We also, again, call this mass marketing. The services provided and the message appeals that we provide would need to be very generic so that they would appeal to a broad audience. Generally, when we run into this type of strategy, our costs are lower in operation, or let me rephrase that, our cost per exposure and cost per client is lower because we're not needing to customize everything. It's not being provided. Custom appeals, customized products, customized delivery is not something that we're focusing on here. So our per unit costs to produce our good are much lower this way. It's appropriate to do if the service is routine and can be duplicated for everyone. If your product does not need to deviate from service in any way, if it can be the same for a large percentage of the client or donor base, then this makes sense. If one size fits all, in other words, then this is what you want to do. One step down is what we call that differentiated market. Sometimes we also call this a target market strategy. So we want to identify probably more than one individual market, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 market segments that are well defined and that we can satisfy their needs for. A service or product or message appeal would need to be designed for each of the market segments. So this is important. Each market segment that we choose should have a marketing plan that is devoted to it. Important considerations when we can do this type of a plan include the competitors that we're going to be faced up against within each of the market segments. We want to also consider very carefully our ability to reach and relate to each market segment. And then finally, we need to consider the costs that we'll have to bear and endure because we're developing multiple market plans, because each market segment that we choose should have a market plan associated with it. The third category, again, moving from broad to narrow, is called concentrated. We might also think of this as niche marketing, where we focus on 1 or 2 market segments that are very well defined, as opposed to several like we would have in the differentiated market concept. This allows nonprofits to focus your resources on a concentration of clients that have some specific needs. The nonprofit organization needs to be very, very careful that we have the resources that are unique enough to be able to satisfy those unique markets that, kind of small market elements. Finally here, if 1 or 2 market segments are selected, then the goal is to have few or no competitors such that the nonprofit serves a very high percentage of the clients in the segment. Think about market share here and think about the idea that you want to be a specialized niche company or service that serves a specific market segment and you dominate that market without a lot of competition. As a side note, you also want to make sure if you follow this type of strategy, you want to make sure the 1 or 2 market segments you're choosing as niches that are profitable enough for you to, or sustainable enough for you to stay in. So this idea of sustainability is that you can serve this market for an enduring period of time, for a long period of time, and you can continue to serve it, and that you can complete your mission without deviating out of this market segment. So it has to be fruitful enough for you to enter into, or else you might need to move to a differentiated strategy. The last concept here is called mass customization. Again, this is a narrow approach because it's a one-to-one approach in handling each client specifically. We do not recognize the idea that clients have things in common. Rather, we're mass customizing our service and our appeals and everything that we do. This approach is very expensive from a cost perspective. Each client receives a personalized product, so as you can imagine, if we're personalizing everything, we're spending a lot of time, energy, and effort in treating each specific customer. As we move forward into the digital age and as we progress through the digital age that we're in, technology is helping us in a huge way. So we have different eras of doing business, and technology kind of serves as a proponent a lot of times. If you know, the Industrial Revolution was really generated as a result of technological leaps in production. Well, fast forward about 120 years and we have today where technology is pushing us into this mass customization arena because of digital properties and things of that nature. So that's something to certainly consider as we move forward. Portions of the value proposition, however, may be customized while other portions are standardized. Here's a thing where we might reach everybody using one medium of communication, but then once customers come in, we might mass customize a service for them. So there are ways that we can mass customize parts of the marketing process and standardize other parts of the marketing process. Sometimes we can do these hybrid combinations of general versus mass kind of appeals, and it's very effective. So don't lose sight of that. Finally, depending on who your audience is, this may be more successful than not. If you're, for instance, looking for donors, and you're cold calling and you're asking people to give money, very often, if it's a donor who's going to give your organization money, as opposed to a client, if you're prospecting for donors, you're probably going to have to meet them on a one-to-one basis and talk to them individually and do a one-to-one type of approach to get them to maybe donate to your mission or to your nonprofit. That would be an appropriate way to use a mass customization appeal. Whereas if you tried to do like a mass market appeal, that would be problematic. All right, so that's the idea then of the initial question: how broad or how narrow should we move forward? Once you identify the targets that the target segments and the markets that you want to reach, we now have to start positioning our product towards those markets. Assume that a nonprofit has competitors and you want to present yourself to the market and to the clients with a unique offer. Well, positioning is that process where we uncover or we elaborate from a client's point of view what needs to be satisfied, what the nonprofit has to do in order to meet their needs. And we're evaluating how well we can do that when compared to our competitors as well. So this process requires us to collect and analyze data based on how the market or how the client perceives us as a nonprofit. And we want to think about this in terms of the criteria that are important to the client. So first, we need to develop a list of relevant dimensions from focus groups. Now, we typically call these determinant attributes, but what we want to do is we want to ask clients what's important to them when they think about solving the need that they have that needs to be solved. So a lot of times we look at financial cost. Sometimes we ask the likelihood of success. So if I'm a client, if I'm thinking about ways to quit smoking, one of the criteria I might use is how successful are these different programs in treating people for smoking cessation, for quitting smoking. And that's a decision like criteria that as a client is important to me. How much does it cost? How likely is this going to be successful? What is the reputation of the nonprofit? How much social pressure am I feeling from people around me? What is my time commitment? Will this cause me to break or abruptly change my routine or my behavior? These are all potential determinant attributes, but what we need to do is we need to talk to consumers, talk to clients, and ask them, maybe in a focus group, which of these are important? Are there others that are important? How important are they? And so forth. So that's the first step. Identify relevant dimensions or determinant attributes of your service that are meaningful to our clients. Second, we need to reduce the number of dimensions probably. If you have a whole list of them, we need to narrow them down to the ones that are the most important to the customer. And then what we want to do is collect some information from the market segments, and we want to evaluate how well we perform on those specific dimensions. So collect data from the market segments, make sure we include the dimensions that are important in changing behavior for our clients. So if the cost of participation and the likelihood of success are the two most important dimensions that that change, whether someone that impact whether someone's going to use your service or not, then that's what we need to be measuring. Make sure that we include ourselves on how we're perceived in terms of performing those things and other solutions that the client may use in order to solve their problem, including competitors. So here's the thing. We want to know how well we stack up to our competition on the dimensions that are important to the customer in choosing the service that we have to offer. That way we can position our product and we know what we can advertise for and we know what we can use to encourage consumers to use our product. As we know, we can take this information and then we can create some maps. By mapping this information, we do what we call a perceptual map, and we put onto a plane, a two-dimensional plane or a space, where our service is perceived based on the factors that we have decided that are important to the customer. Okay, so there's two basic strategies then, what we call a gap approach and then a direct approach. When we're positioning, when we're trying to create a niche or a differentiation strategy, we look for ways we can be different from our competitors, or we may look to compete directly with another solution. And in that case, we want to try to take market share or clients away from a competitor or a competing solution. In a map, we have options that kind of look like this. So here we have different competitors and different solutions to ours. And so we have A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, and you can choose any one of these, or you can choose to say, well, look, where should I enter this map? These two dimensions, reputation and cost, seem to be important factors when they come to when we come to this idea or notion of whatever the service is to the client. So high reputation, costs that depending on how the scale is, it could be usually we have a thing here where the cost would be low up high and the cost is high when we're talked down here. So this scale is reversed, but that's okay. That's not a problem. We know that up in this quadrant up here is usually good. Down in this quadrant down here is usually a value product. So we have maybe an exclusive or a premium solution up in this quadrant and then a value solution here. You typically would not be in this area and you typically would not see anything in this area. You usually would not have something with a low reputation and a high cost or vice versa or something like that, or a high value. A high value or high reputation may not go together and vice versa. So where can we be? Well, there's a gap. Here's a gap. Potentially there's a gap. We have different sizes of gaps, which would represent different sizes of markets that are not being served. These would be opportunities where we might be able to squeeze in a solution that would satisfy some clients who otherwise are not being satisfied today. Okay, so this is positioning. This, this video here, really we cover a lot of material. We're talking about different scopes of market, and then we're talking about how to choose the targets that we're going to go into and position them as we move forward. So we want to define the magnitude or the scope of the market that we're going to serve. And remember, there are 4 elements here from broad to narrow: undifferentiated, differentiated, concentrated, and mass customization. And then finally, we need to understand from the client's point of view what is important to them and as they decide to use our service, and then how we relate to them relative to the other solutions. So that's their perceptions, and that's why we call that a perceptual map. We're mapping the perceptions the customer has of our solution on criteria that they feel are important. So that's super important to follow the logic on that, and it makes sense. From a managerial standpoint, this is a very, very powerful tool that we want to be able to use as we move forward. Okay, so we wrap this up. Again, have a fantastic day. Touch base with me. Let me know if you have questions. I look forward to hearing from you. As always, have a fantastic day.